scheme actions on that product: running, testing, profiling for performance, analyzing your source code, and archiving for distribution. When you select one of these actions, Xcode will build the targets needed to produce your product, and then perform the selected action on your product. So schemes are the tools that you use to configure and drive all your actions in Xcode, and that's why they're the central topic of today's presentation. I'm going to start out today by covering the core concepts: workspaces, projects, targets, schemes, and run destinations. Maybe review for some of you, but these are the fundamentals that you'll need to understand the rest of our presentation. Then we're going to dive into some use cases to help you get the most out of the 5 scheme actions. We'll tell you how to work with your build products and how to customize their location. Then go over how to manage your schemes and share them with your coworkers. Finally, we're going to finish today by showing you how you can work with static libraries for iOS projects. So let's get started. We're going to go into the core concepts. Our first concept today is workspaces. A workspace groups together references to projects and the related files that you want to work with together into one workspace document. Generally, you'll create a workspace for each distinct set of projects that you want to work with together. And when you group projects in this way, they share some important things. Every workspace gets a unique symbol index, a location for build products, saved window state, and build logs. Furthermore, a workspace allows implicit dependencies to be resolved between targets in that workspace. If one target produces a product that another target in the same workspace links against, Xcode will discover this, and it will automatically build the target that builds the library before the target that links against that library. There's one more thing you should know about workspaces in Xcode, and that's even if you haven't created an explicit workspace document, when you open a project in Xcode, you always have a workspace. If you just open a standalone project, Xcode creates an implicit workspace for that project. And we'll actually stash a workspace file inside the project wrapper. So anytime you're working with a project, you have a workspace, which includes a unique symbol index, location for build products, and more. Anytime in this presentation that I say something about a workspace, you can assume that the same thing is true about a standalone project as well. Now let's talk about projects and about build configurations. A project contains references to your source files and resources, targets which process those source files to produce your product, and schemes which build those targets and perform actions on their products. Projects also contain build configurations, which allow you to specify different values for your build settings for debug and release over any other custom configurations you've created. Every project comes with debug and release build configurations. And most build settings only have one value, but some, like your optimization level, will have a different value for debug and release. Most of you can get by with just debug and release configuration. But if you need to vary your build settings for some other purpose, you can create another build configuration to do so. You get at your build configurations in the project editor. First, you select your project in the project navigator on the left, then select the project in the source list in the middle. The project editor will be on the right and contains your build configurations. Now let's talk about targets. A target is the set of instructions for processing some source files and producing one build product. So your target will reference some or all of the source files in its project, and it contains some build phases, which are the ordered sequence of steps that the target will take to produce your product. There are a set of build rules which tell the compile sources build phase how to compile those source files, and there are a set of build settings which control just about every aspect of the build process. Targets can also have explicit dependencies on one or more other targets. So if a target depends on another target, the target depended on will always be automatically built whenever the target that depends on it is built. You edit your target settings by going to the project, selecting the project in the project navigator on the left, and then instead selecting the target in the source list in the middle. In the target editor on the right, if we select the Build Phases tab, you will see all the build phases, the ordered sequence of steps that are taken to produce this target's product. So let's talk about a few of the things that you might want to do here. If you want to make your target explicitly depend on another target, you can add it in the Target Dependencies build phase. If you click the plus button here, you'll see all the targets in this target's project, as well as all targets in projects that this target's project has a reference to. So if you're not seeing the target you want to depend on, make sure that this target's project has a reference to the project that contains the target you want to depend on. The compile sources phase allows you to set per file compiler flags, and also lets you just see and control which source files this target will compile to produce your product. If you want your product to link against some libraries or frameworks, you do that in the Link Binaries with Libraries phase. You click the plus button here, we'll show you all the libraries available in your chosen SDK, as well as all libraries produced by targets in this workspace. You can also drag in any library or framework that you have a reference to in your workspace just by dragging it in from the project navigator. If you're building a framework, you can control which headers wind up in the public and private headers location inside that framework with a copy headers build phase. Any headers you leave in the project section here will not be copied into your build framework and will instead only be available to the project itself. If you want to copy some image files or other resources into your product, you can do so with a copy bundle resources phase, which copies the selected resources into the resources directory inside your product bundle, or you can use a copy files phase to copy resources into any other location within the product or your build directory. Finally, if what you need to do to build your product isn't covered by these other build phases, you can always use a run script build phase to do anything that a shell script can do. You can reorder this phase among the other phases to control exactly when it runs and have as many of them as you want. If you select the Build Rules tab, you'll see the default set of rules that we use to control how the compile sources phase works. Most of you don't need to ever do anything here, but if you do have some special type of source file that you need to compile in a special way, you can set up a build rule to do it here. Finally, we have the build settings. You'll notice that most build settings only have one value, but there are some, like optimization level, that you'll have set with different values for each configuration. If you want to vary a build setting value across different configurations, you can click on the disclosure triangle to the left of the build setting. And if you want to set further conditions per SDK or per architecture to vary your build setting further, you can hover over the build configuration here and click the little plus button that shows up. Now there's one more important axis of configuration with your build settings, and that's the levels. If you click on the Levels tab, you'll see the complete hierarchy from which your build settings are inherited. On the right are the default values that will be used for each build setting if you don't override them. And to the left of that are the project level build settings. If you go back to the project editor, you'll notice that there's a settings tab there too. And any build setting values that you set at the project level will be inherited by all of its targets. The target level build settings is where you go to set build setting values that apply to just this target, and it will override the values set at the project or the default. And finally, on the left, we show you the resolved value that will be used for every build setting in the target. You'll notice that there's some green boxes drawn here. We draw a green box around the level from which the final value of each of these build settings is being taken, so you can just see at a glance where your actual build setting values are coming from. So that's targets. Let's talk about the schemes that build them. A scheme is a file that contains the instructions for building a set of targets to produce a product, and then performing actions on that product. So we have actions for running, testing, profiling for your performance, analyzing your source code, and archiving for distribution. For each of those actions, the scheme contains a specification of the targets that will be built when you perform that action. You can get at your schemes in the upper left-hand corner of the workspace window in the scheme pop-up. When you click this, you'll see a list of all the schemes available in your workspace. And if you choose Edit Scheme, we'll bring up the scheme sheet and let you edit the settings of your selected scheme. When you want to perform a scheme action, you can do so from the product menu in Xcode's menu bar, or you can click the button in the upper left-hand corner of the workspace window. And actually, if you hold this, we offer the 4 scheme actions that you also want to run repeatedly by clicking often, which are Run, Test, Profile, and Analyze. And you'll notice that I haven't mentioned Build as a scheme action. Build is not one of the actions. Building is actually a step that always happens before a scheme action. So when you're building, you're always building for some purpose, like, I want to build my product to run in the debugger, or I'm ready to build my product to archive for distribution. The action that you've chosen here specifies how you build, and that it can choose which targets you're building from the scheme, and which build configuration they should build with. We do offer a plain build command in the product menu, but that's actually just a shortcut for build for running, which is the most common reason you want to build. In the scheme edit sheet, you'll notice that the 5 scheme commands are listed on the left, But at the top, above them, there's a section for build, and that's where you go to configure how your scheme actions build in the scheme. The scheme lists all the targets that the scheme will build, along with checkboxes that determine which scheme actions build which targets. So, most of your targets you want to build for all 5 scheme actions, but sometimes you don't. So, for example, if you have a unit test bundle, you really only need to build those tests when you're going to perform the test action, so you only need to have that checked for the test action here. You notice that some of these checkboxes can't be disabled. Well, if a scheme action is actually using the product of one of these targets directly, like, say, your run action is running the application product of your application target, then that target must be built for that scheme action, and you can't disable it without unsetting the scheme action using that product. We have some other options here. By default, Xcode will try to parallelize the build of all your targets as long as it can with respect to dependencies. If for some reason you need Xcode to instead build each target listed in your scheme in series, you can turn off parallel builds. Also, the implicit dependencies feature I mentioned earlier can be turned off here if you don't want Xcode to automatically find and build targets that produce libraries before it builds the targets that link against those libraries. You notice that build configuration was not there in the build slice. That's because each action specifies its own build configuration. For example, when running or testing, you usually want your debug build configuration. But when profiling or archiving for distribution, you usually want your release build configuration. If you select an action here, like the test action that I've selected, you'll see a control that lets you control which build configuration is used when performing that action. That's scheme. Now, when you're performing a scheme action, you always have to tell Xcode where you want to perform it, and that where is the run destination. Run destination encompasses the device that you want to build for and run on. So we give you a choice among the plugged-in iOS devices configured for development, all your available simulators, and the local Mac, depending on what your product supports. You'll note that you only see devices that are actually compatible with your target's base SDK and deployment target build settings. You get at your run destinations in the upper left on the right-hand side of the scheme pop-up, and when you select that, we'll show you all available run destinations that are compatible with the targets in your selected scheme. So that covers the core fundamentals. Now I'd like to invite Mirza up on stage to walk you through some use cases for the 5 scheme actions.